My name is Marsha Scott. I'm a member of Edinburgh Women for Independence and on the National Committee for WFI. And as I said before, totally honored and delighted to be in this room with all of you. The format for tonight is that we're going to invite each of the candidates to make a very short introduce themselves and 1 or 2 minutes about anything that they want. They can tell you about their grandchildren if you want. Well, actually, I might be the only one that age. And then we're going to launch right into questions with you folks. And the only thing I'm going to say in terms of my chair, well, I'll say 2 things about the assumptions I'm making around chairing. One is that this will be a very friendly, civilized debate focused on the general election and politics that are amenable to influencing at Westminster. So, in other words, that was a code for let's not have any party politics stuff, let's focus on the issues. And the second thing will be that I find that I went to a hustings, I think Martin was there also, in Edinburgh, North and Leith last week, and I thought that the bits of it that went great were when the responses, the questions were very focused and the responses were focused on the questions. So, and I think, having been on the other side of this, that it's easy to forget what the question is when you start off on an explanation. So I'm going to encourage you, and I'm going to try and remind people about what the question was if they seem to have missed it in their answer. Okay? Are those rules okay with everybody? Beautiful. So we're going to go in alphabetical order. And just to let you know, so that will start with Clare Adamson, who's at the end, and it will end with Martin Veart, who's at the other end, and I didn't actually orchestrate that, but we will pop back and forth a little bit. So, and somebody's going to time? Is that you? Yeah? Okay, just to make sure that we don't have any excessive over enthusiasm. That's okay. Claire, go for it.
Thank you very much. I'm Clare Adamson. I'm currently an MSP in the Scottish Parliament, so not standing in this election. I represent Central Region, but come from Lanarkshire, from Motherwell and Boyack constituency. I've been a member of the SNP since 1989, so as you can imagine, at that time in Lanarkshire, my family thought I had crossed to the dark side and grown horns. It was the closure of Ravenscraig in my area that brought me to politics, because I knew what the devastation of 10,000 jobs when lost in my area would do for poverty and for aspirations and opportunities for my classmates at that time. And nothing in the intervening years has changed my mind that Scotland would be better off as an independent country as part of the European Union. In this election, following the independence referendum, obviously Scotland chose to remain part of the UK, and we respect that decision. But nonetheless, I think Scotland is invigorated. Turning out a meeting like this on a Greek evening is testament to how much interest there is in politics and what politics can do for the people of Scotland. And in this election, what we need to do is make sure that our voice for an alternative, for a change, for a different approach to politics is heard loud and clear at Westminster. I'm the Deputy Convener of the Welfare Reform Committee in the Parliament, so the evidence we've been seeing over the last few months in no uncertain terms shows us the devastating real personal cost to people of the welfare reform and the austerity agenda. It hasn't worked, it hasn't fixed the economy. George Osborne has missed every target, and yet most vulnerable in our society are paying and will continue to pay the price of austerity. So what we need to do is send an alternative vision, a vision about a different type of society, one that looks after our most vulnerable and gives opportunities to people, and that's the message the SNP will take to Westminster.
Oh, well timed. Bang on. Okay, so the next will be Pat Black. And you want to turn the mic towards yourself, Pat?
Claire's just letting me use her timer, so that's already cooperation. So I'm Pat Black. I'm a candidate in Edinburgh West, and I live in Edinburgh West. And I came newer to politics than to Clare. I came and joined the Green Party just when the Green Party came out as saying yes to the referendum. And I was attracted by the social justice aspect of the Green Party. And I have worked for 35 or so years, probably more than that, in social and health care. So my working life, I've been working with people on the margins for all sorts of reasons, through all sorts of, it's easy for anybody to get to the margins, it's hard to get back again. And lots of those people have suffered hugely under the austerity measures. And I was really dissatisfied with politics. I mean, I felt like I voted tactically and nothing ever got better. And I also realised that, you know, austerity, we've got to help the country, that the poorest people were getting poorer, as Clare was saying, and the rich people were getting richer. It wasn't that everybody was going, you know, the people on the lowest incomes that earn like about 5,000 have an income of £5,000 a year, and they had a 9% cut since 2010. The richest people have had a 3.5% cut. That is not fair. So my motivation for being in the Green Party is to be a party of sustainable social justice. So really trying to ensure that social justice is carried out, that we make an end to poverty, that we stop the welfare reforms that are going on, that are putting people into such a, you know, having to use food banks and to really struggle to manage. And we need to do that in a sustainable way. So I think that we have in the Green Party a lot of policies which are about how to devolve things to local communities, so that local communities can really own the decisions that are made. We know that when people say something about helping the health service, that's okay to say it from central government, but unless the local people are involved in it, the changes don't necessarily make a difference. So that's what we're interested in. And I've gone over just by 11 seconds.
There'll be a small fine. Sarah, up to you.
Hi, good evening, and it's great to see so many faces this evening. I suppose I first got involved in politics when I was at school in Edinburgh. I was in the first intake of girls going to a local state school, and that has just probably marked me for life, and it's why I'm on the platform probably. I got involved in the women's group and Labour students when I went to university, and at that point developed a passion for the environment and for social justice, which I've just carried with me throughout that time. I was a passionate supporter of devolution. I think we've created a more open, more accessible institution, and my big issue is how we use the powers we've got and how we use the new powers we're having. And for me, over the next 8 days, I am hoping that we get a Labour government at the end of the election process. I'm hoping that we can reset the clock in Britain, that we can create a fairer society, get rid of the House of Lords, and do the kind of involvement with citizens across the rest of the UK that we've been able to do in Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland. For me, fairer tax is at the heart of it, using the mansion tax, using the banker's bonus and the hedge fund tax, the tax on tobacco companies, reinstituting 50p tax for those that are earning 150,000 a year, and ending non-dom status. I think a radical tax agenda to give us more money that will help us invest in the NHS in Scotland, in our school services, and crucially an anti-poverty fund to tackle and end the bedroom tax. And I would like us to transfer housing benefit money in Scotland, because I'd like us to build many, many thousands of social houses that we desperately need for people. And in a city like Edinburgh, you can see the social divide getting worse and worse. And for me, this election is about calling time on that, giving us a chance to set the country in a new direction, with a new Labour government that would be able to work with us in the Scottish Parliament, but crucially also work with our local authorities, because we need bottom-up politics as well as politics at the national level. And for me, that's what this election offers us: a chance for change, a chance for fairness, and the chance to set forward a new society that's going to be fairer, with women at the heart of that process. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I do have to say it's going downhill. We've got up to 10 seconds. Sarah Boyack. Sorry.
You have mentioned the Liberal Party a couple of times. I take it you're representing them, Sarah. Thank you very much.
And that was my fault for not possibly being clearer about that. Natalie Reid now for discussing on behalf of the Scottish Socialist Party.
Thank you. I don't have a timer, so I'll just wing it. I'll start going. My name is Natalie Reid. I'm from the Scottish Socialist Party. I also work in retail, that's my day job, 40 hours a week for just above the minimum wage. So for me, the politics of the left and the issues facing working class women on a daily basis are things I can really relate to and things that I really want to see changes in. Like a lot of people, I got engaged in politics during the referendum, and like many, once I started, I found it hard to stop. I think we can all agree that one of the best things to come out of the referendum, we might not have got the result that we wanted, but we respect it. One of the best things was the political engagement of women all around Scotland from all walks of life. And what's more amazing is that engagement has continued and can't be ignored, and that's why events like this are important in election years, but also all the time, getting women's issues on the agenda, and I believe that the Scottish Socialist Party does that. It's at the heart of what we do. I'm here tonight to represent them. We have a great candidate standing in Edinburgh South. It's our co-spokesperson, Colin Fox. He's standing on a platform for an independent socialist Scotland, standing for the Scotland working class majority. I really look forward to your questions tonight and hearing about the issues that matter to you, so thanks for having me.
Martin, over to you. Martin's a Lib Dem.
Yeah, good evening, everybody.
And his last name is Veart, sorry.
Thank you, that's okay. My name is indeed Martin Veart. I'm the Liberal Democrat candidate for Edinburgh North and Leith. I work in the oil and gas industry, have done for the past 20 years. And when I first started in the industry, obviously some of my friends from university were looking around for a job as well. And they contacted me and they said, Martin, have you got any work where you are? And I said, yeah, send up your CV, no problem, because there was vacancies. I was a bit disturbed why my friends who were female never got an interview, and the reason I found out much later is that my manager was throwing the CVs from many women applicants in the bin. Now, that was 20 years ago in the oil industry. I'm glad to say that things have changed a lot since then. Some of the companies now are extremely good employers, but we have to recognise that things have not changed enough on the equality, in terms of equality. Our pay gap is still the 8th highest in the EU, and Jo Swinson, the Liberal Democrat Minister for Women in Business, managed to get a victory through Parliament in the dying days at the end of March. We had asked companies to voluntarily put up the pay differences between men and women. Only 5 large companies obliged that over the period. In the last days, we have now put that into law. So companies over 250 will be obliged from 2016 to list the pay gaps, and also secrecy clauses where it is forbidden to discuss pay with fellow employees are now to be banned. That's what we've been doing on the National Front, and there's the time.
Thank you very much. And now, while you're storing up your burning questions, I would just like to comment on the fact that while we don't have a Conservative Party speaker today, that the Conservatives did respond to the answer time questions that were sent to the different parties, and that there's a written response up there, and I believe on your chairs. And also, if you're struggling with just which issue is the most burning for you, feel free to reference this, I think, and pick up any questions you might have from the answers that have been submitted. I don't think we got one from the Labour Party or the Lib Dems, so feel free to ask those questions also of Sarah and Martin. Okay, so now a reminder that I'm a hearing impaired, so you have to use the mic. And Pauline is there, our lovely assistant. And we'll take 3 or 4 questions to start. And my experience is it's a little slow to get the ball rolling, but then generally things go wild. So hang in there, but be brave the first few folks. So let me see some hands. who would like to start?
Okay.
Claire, go for it.
Okay, in terms of work capability assessments, the growing evidence is that they just do not work. We've recently taken evidence in the Scottish Parliament from people with mental health issues who found the whole process actually made them ill in terms of the stress and the upset that it caused. But what we really have to do is look at what we can influence in terms of halting some of the welfare reform that's there. So we would want to see that any type of assessment was conducted with the person's dignity at the very heart of what they're doing. And we've recently just put into legislation in the Scottish Parliament for the first time that in dealing with some of the benefits that we do have control of in Scotland, that dignity should be the heart of everything that should be done. In terms of where we are, we would like to stop the rollout of personal independence payments completely, if that were possible. And what the whole experience has shown us is that even when we mitigate against the welfare reforms and some of the aspects of that, like work capability assessments that have been so demeaning and so difficult for people, and even the number of appeals that are successful show that it's a broken system, that we really need fundamental change in the whole attitude about where the welfare reform is going, and we would hope to put a stop to some of the current plans and to influence it in a different way so that people's dignity was at the heart of what was done. In terms of a gender balanced cabinet, I think that's, we're leading by example in Scotland. I believe we're in one of only 2 parliaments in the world that has a gender balanced, that's me supposed to be going to the Venetian Twins tonight, which I'm missing. To be here with you this evening, sorry about that. But I think we're leading by example in Scotland. I think the First Minister has made it absolutely clear. But it's not just about cabinets, as been expressed. It has to get to the root of gender discrimination that still exists, and that has to be rolled out and it has to be pushed down to all levels in society. I have the Mind the Gap poster in my room that says, prepare your daughter for working life, pay her less pocket money than your son. And it's amazing the effect that has on young people that come in and can absolutely look at that and see, oh, that's so unfair, and what's that about? And how we lose that unfairness almost as soon as we're in the workplace is just terrible. I'll maybe talk more about that if I get a chance, about my experience of 18 years in the IT industry before becoming a politician later on. In terms of independent schools in Scotland, I think it can be a very divisive issue. I think what we're trying to do in Scotland is go for more equal, a fairer society, one in which your ability to learn is not limited by the environment in which you're born into, and we make Scotland the best place in the world to grow up. And we look at our Nordic neighbours that have achieved that level of equality in their own societies. They have very, very few private schools because the state schools are of such a quality that private education isn't needed. And I think that's what we should be aiming for, is to improving our state schools, to continue to work with the Early Years Collaborative to tackle some of the poverty and the inequality that exists in our state system and ensure that our state system can be the best it can be.
Great, thanks Claire. And can I encourage you and us to try and focus on the issues that are most relevant for Westminster, and keep focused on what your party will do should it be elected in going to Westminster. Not Claire that you didn't do that. I just want to make sure that we maximize the impact of our comments here. You're worried that I won't do that. So.
Would you do anything to affect the work capabilities? Yes. I agree with Claire that it's completely ineffective, and I've just got a thing here that people are saying that there's 92% of the tasks that you're set in these assessments are inaccessible. So they're inaccessible to people with mental health problems. A friend of mine uses a wheelchair which she drives with her foot. Her assessment was upstairs and there was no lift. So that just shows the reality, and the thing about it is that it's ridiculous and it's funny and it's distressing, because she was worried about that for weeks and weeks and weeks, and then she gets given another date and she doesn't know if she's going to be in a place that's accessible or not. And for people with mental health problems, sometimes they're not able to get there on time. That's part of the issue for people, and so they can't turn up. It's inaccessible to them. So definitely we need to be thinking differently about work assessments. There's very good groups of people with disabilities who would be very good at working out a much better system, and I think that's what we should be doing, asking people who are directly affected by some kind of issue to work on the best way to assess for work capabilities and to help people to find ways that are accessible, that are creative and that are interesting, because it's not to say you can't work if you feel that. Work doesn't suit lots of people in the way it's constructed, and that's a lot also to do with gender balance. So I'll go on to the next question about gender balance. And the Green Party has a ZIP system for all candidates, and so there's always equal numbers of men and women, no less than 40% of either men or women in any. So a list is stopped when it stops. If it runs out of women, then it's stopped. So there will always be equal numbers of men and women. It's not a perfect system, but it's a good start to make things different. And we also have a gender balanced we don't have a leader of the party, we have two co-conveners, a man and a woman. And so that's all the way through. We try to practice what we're preaching around that, and I think that we're leaders also in gender balancing. And I think, though, we have to tackle, like Clare was saying, some of the more subtle nature of it, because, you know, meetings are in the evenings, women with small children, that's really difficult. For people who are interested in politics and who are women, it's set up in a way that makes it really difficult. You know, when I was coming here tonight, I got an invitation to come, and there was a bit of me that said, well, I'll wait and see if one of the men wants to do it first. I don't know why I do that, but there's something that happens, and then I caught myself and said, well, why would I do that? But there's a subtle feeling in me which says men should be better at it. I'm really ashamed of that, but it's true. And I know that I've got 3 daughters, they're in their 30s, they have different kinds of jobs. One makes furniture. For her, she gets a lot of a girl making furniture, and you know, this is 2015. It's ridiculous. So I think we need to address those subtle aspects of inequality and sexism that are in all of us and in our society, and that will do a lot also to help with politics. And I think private and independent schools are also there's an issue around gender too, I think, that for many of the segregated schools, and there's not so many of them as there used to be, but for segregated schools, that also perpetuates something that we see showing up in the current government. We see a kind of elitist, mainly male-centred way of presenting politics, which turns a lot of women off. And I think that our schools, our independent schools, kind of go in that direction. Not all of them, but some of them do. And I think that needs to be changed. And I agree with Clare that it's building up a state system to be so attractive, so useful, and so educationally successful for all of our citizens that's going to make a difference.
Thanks. I think the question about gender balance was, will there be a gender balanced cabinet if your party has any say over that? So I suppose I would ask both of you to respond to that specifically.
Yes.
Yeah.
The SNP have said many things about who they'd be willing to work with and who they wouldn't. I think they've made it quite clear that an SNP group within Westminster is very unlikely to be in a formal coalition with any of the leading parties. That's not to say that they wouldn't come to some other arrangement, whether it's confidence supply or a vote-by-vote basis support for whichever, if certainly not the Tory party, but the Labour get in, that might happen. So on that basis, it would be unlikely we would be taking part in the cabinet and would have little influence on what that makeup of that parliament, of that cabinet would be from that respect.
We would want it to be gender balanced, and it's very unlikely that the Greens are going to hold a majority in Westminster. However, if we did, we would definitely be gender balanced. So I think we'd be in a similar position, that the Green Party would be very committed to making the influence it could do, but it couldn't guarantee to be doing anything about it at this time.
So for the first question, last year research funded by the Equality and Human Rights Commission found that women, ethnic minorities and disabled people were hit hardest by the austerity agenda, by these sanctions and cuts that have been put forward. We don't want a total end to benefit sanctions. We just don't think it's fair. You can't hold claimants to account for an economical and financial crisis that they just did not cause. And as part of that, we would of course want to see all welfare powers devolved to Holyrood so that we can stop these kind of unfair sanctions. For the second question, Kirsten, was it on the gender balance? We've got quite a good record in this. When we had MSPs, 4 out of 6 were women. We think that a gender balance is important everywhere, especially in government. We make up 52% of the population. Of course, we should have a balanced government to show that. So that's very important to us. Yeah, we would support a gender balanced cabinet. I don't know if we'll have the power to do that this year, but we would definitely be in support of it 100%. And for the schools, short answer is yes, we would close private schools. We want a publicly owned and fully accountable education system that's equal and fair and free to everyone. And we would close private schools.
Yep, just going along. Jack's question, yes, what's been happening in terms of sanctions and the way disabled people have been particularly hit. It's not just by the work capability tests, it's also people with disabilities have definitely been losing out with the bedroom tax and how that's impacted on people. So both of those things need to be addressed. I would add to the list, it's much harder for people with disabilities to get work generally, so we need a much bigger push on that. And the loss of Remploy and Blindcraft. In Edinburgh, I've seen it from constituents whose opportunities have gone, but there's support for people as individuals to get access in the public sector and the private sector to be able to get the jobs in the first place. I'd like to see more people with disabilities in politics. I think having more women in politics has made a big difference in the Scottish Parliament, and there's a campaign launched just a couple of weeks ago to get more people with disabilities into politics. Totally support that. In terms of the gender balancing cabinet at the UK level, I think Ed Miliband's pretty much there. And if you look across the roles, they're not issued on the basis of gender. I had a tough job in the Scottish Parliament as our first transport minister. I'd come from a male environment in town planning, but transport is even more male orientated, not in terms of what we need in our day-to-day services, but engineering, transport engineering, a very male dominated profession. So you need to have 50-50 in terms of women, but also, it was a point one of the others made about not just confining women to what are seen as women's roles, such as health and education. It's got to cut right across the economy and transport. We've had 50-50 on our MSPs pretty much since day one. We've used the list system with zipping, we've twin seats, and we've used all women shortlists at the UK level. And I can just see the difference it's made over the last 15 to 20 years. But it does need to be in the senior leadership levels as well. Last point I'd make there is about running for election. It is not cheap. And the point that was made, if you're a shop worker and you're a lower income, the diet is set against you right from the start. So the trade unions have been hugely important in getting more women across the parties, and I think that needs to be developed. In terms of private and independent schools, I wouldn't ban them. But there are issues about tax breaks that are given on the basis of contribution to society. It's very much a Scottish Parliament issue, but it is something we need to keep under review. And I agree with the others on the platform. We need to tackle underachievement and failing state schools, particularly in terms of literacy and numeracy. More emphasis on that. Early years, everything we know about that is it's early years. And support for kids who come from families that would otherwise be failing. But I think in terms of state schools, it's not just about education in the classroom, it's also about sports, culture and arts and confidence. And having been brought up in Edinburgh, they're the things that the private schools have, apart from networking. But we need to make sure that kids in state schools get the best possible education and it's not just about being in the classroom, it's all the social skills that are fundamental to life. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a bit like Pat, actually, because my first instinct when I heard about this hustings yesterday is, can't one of our women do it? To take our worker capability assessments first, yes, Liberal Democrats, obviously they have targets, especially some of the private companies there. We have pledged to do away with any target or any, and have fair assessments, and we also understand that accessibility is a vital component. Just last week, had a coffee morning up at Fourth Community, and again Pat was there, and there was one lady telling her story. She obviously was unable to work, and the assessor said, "Oh, we'll just come and have a blather for a few minutes and don't worry about it." She was called back the next week because obviously there was targets involved, and they said, "Well, why didn't you give her a proper assessment?" You know, so we would do away with that kind of thing. Also on the single room supplement, which incidentally was originally a Labour idea for the private sector, it was taken in, but it was really executed badly. For disabilities, no initial allowance was made for that. That obviously has changed now. When it comes to gender balanced cabinet, yes, I believe yourself there, Marsha, asked me a question at the last hustings about... Yeah, I think you might have. About the gender balance. Liberal Democrats who have got some wonderful women, but we're not at all gender balanced in representation. Nick Clegg was on Women's Hour a few weeks ago saying that it's probably time that we did something about it, but a lot of resistance is actually from within the party itself. We are a democratic party. A lot of the women are vocally against such moves. So anything that we do, sorry, but it's the same. I've had arguments with many people there, and I personally would favour it. I would, like the Liberal Democrats in our manifesto, we say that there should be 30% of boards room for directorships. Norway has got 40%. Just recently, Germany has went for a 25% mandatory level. I reckon that anything that politicians would like to see in the boardroom, we should be living by ourselves. So that means quotas, and that means my own party should be doing it as well, in my opinion. Private and independent schools. I have a dark confession to make. Yes, I am a product of an independent school. Didn't do me much good on the networking, I'll tell you that for nothing. I think as far as Edinburgh is concerned, is that my daughter does not go to an independent school, and there is a constant drain of teachers being milked away and getting better paid jobs here in Edinburgh. I understand that 25% of children in Edinburgh actually go to independent schools. I've got a pet theory on this: the rich will always look after themselves. And so unless you do something as draconian as banning schools, which I'm not in favour of, then I would want to see our levels brought up, which is what the Liberal Democrats have delivered with the pupil premium. In England, it's a devolved matter, but we make sure that the funding follows the student, especially from those with the more disadvantaged backgrounds. So if they move school, their funding follows them throughout their career. Link that to the early learning. We definitely want to see by the 2020, 2 to 4 year olds, 20 hours a week for preschool learning, and have 4-year-olds school ready with good linguistic skills by the time they go to their first primary class. I think I've covered it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. That was long, and I take responsibility for not having sort of that at the beginning. So I think this next one, we're going to limit the response, okay, to 1 minute. Yep, so that we can get lots of questions in. But I just want to do a quick check with the 3 questioners. Are you happy that you got your questions answered?
Yes, thank you.
No, but I don't know if it's
A specific question to any of the candidates?
I suppose, first of all to Martin, that your party hasn't actually done really a lot at all, and in fact overseen some brutal welfare reforms aimed at disabled people, and that has really hurt people. And what I want to know is specifically what you would do, and I don't know, like, doing somebody's assessment all in one go isn't really a massive overhaul of the system, and it's a horrible system.
Well, it is a horrible system, yeah. I mean, I have to rush my answers because we are limited for time. The universal credit, a lot of the people that were speaking to me last week were saying that there are cliff edges that they fall off, and they want to work, but if they get work, they're actually financially less better off. The policies of the coalition was to make work pay better every time, and that's where the universal credit, which is another hash which has not been well executed, I have to admit, was supposed to even out. So as people come into the working environment, they're not financially worse off, they should be better off every time. When it comes to the work capability assessments, the point I was trying to make was about the targets involved. Like some of these private companies which are coming in simply weren't being paid unless they hit certain percentages of getting people back into work. Hence the absolutely overwhelming pressure. You know, no pain, no result, no pay contracts on there. So that was desperately unfair.
Time up.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, more questions. We have one here. Others? Second one there. And one in the back. Okay, let's start here. And will you tell us if you want specific, and I'm just going to comment if it's about an issue that I'm pretty sure is not reserved. Okay?
Okay.
Go ahead.
My question is about fracking. Okay. I'll probably just, can I ask SNP, Green and Labour? My question is, does your party support an outright ban on fracking, that Scotland would become a fracking-free zone like other parts of the world? If the answer to that is no, to what level does your party feel that fracking is acceptable in Scotland, and what would it accept?
Megan? Yeah, just, oh, okay, whichever. Go, Pauline.
It looks as though the SNP, oh, is this, no? Looks like the SNP are gaining from the first past the post system in the Westminster election, but we also, in Scotland, we run on a proportional system. For the sake of everybody, will you be working towards shifting Westminster to proportional system? What can you do to get that to happen? Because although it's benefiting SNP at the moment, actually, it's a bad system, which they're beginning to realise down south.
And is that for everybody?
That's for everybody.
Okay, thank you very much.
Particularly to Martin, I would like to ask whether the Lib Dems would ever enter into a coalition that included UKIP MPs, and also, I suppose in general, if any parties have any sort of coalition boundaries that they would like for us to know about, that would be interesting to hear.
Okay, we'll go with those. In terms of the fracking, there's quite a bit of that is devolved. So I'll ask the candidates to focus on, you know, to make clear when they're talking about things that are within the Scottish Parliament's gift or when they're talking about Westminster action. Okay?
Marsha, sorry, is it a minute per question?
Yes. So let's start on this end, and Martin, you were the happy recipient of a couple of specific questions, so let's start with you. We'll give you a couple extra minutes, okay?
Okay. So Okay, fracking quickly. Was I invited on that one? Yeah, sure. Okay, I'm probably one of the few people in the room actually taking part in fracking operations, so I could go on about this all night and bore you mightily. However, for ENEOS, for example, which wants to frack under the Firth of Forth, they want to, it's not exactly fracking, but the details are that it's slightly dirtier than burning diesel in power stations. I think that coal should be left in the ground. If we're going to detach ourselves from fossil fuel that we need to do, yes, let's start with the dirtiest fuel, which is coal. For fracking in general, am I against it? No, but safeguards have to be in place. For instance, we've already established in Westminster, no fracking in national parks, no fracking where portable water supplies can be polluted. And also, I'll move on to the next question in that case, then first past the post. It's given to a Liberal Democrat. We campaigned on it, we held the referendum, we hope that Labour would support us on the policy which they advocated themselves in the dying days of the last Parliament. Sadly that was not so, everybody lined up against it, and there is a certain amount of schadenfreude in my book about the SNP threatening to gain so many seats because, you know, I can turn around and say, well, told you so. So as a rotten system, we would like far greater proportionality in, and we're open to ideas on it. Yeah, we're not going to dictate over what system. And sorry, what was the last question for me again?
Would the Lib Dems enter into a coalition?
Coalition with UKIP, yes, thank you very much.
Not just solely with UKIP, but any coalition that includes UKIP.
Probably beyond my pay scale, but my personal opinion is that I'm not a nationalist. I feel that liberalism is diametrically opposed to nationalism in so many ways. I see UKIP as English nationalist party. We disagree with them on so many levels. It would be very hard to work with them on a regular basis.
Would it be hard to work with the Tories, you would imagine, on a regular basis?
Yeah, absolutely. But that's the thing with the centre party. I mean, Cameron did an amazing thing. He dragged his party over towards the leadership, at least towards the centre right. So that made it a bit easier. But yeah, we could. Well, his leadership. I didn't say his membership. That's it. A coalition is possible. We've proved that it is possible. It just depends on who the partners are.
Thank you very much. Sarah?
In terms of fracking, we've said that we would have a triple lock on fracking. We've spent some time examining the issue. We've currently got planning powers in Scotland, but we don't have the full regulatory and licensing powers. They are coming to us under the Smith Commission. And at the UK level, we supported amendments to improve the questions that are asked and the regulatory strength of the process down south. But in terms of Scotland, we've said that until we've learned from experience in the rest of the UK, we don't think there should be any fracking allowed in Scotland. Further, before there was to be any fracking in Scotland, we would require a local referendum. And thirdly, we'd want to have a proper review of the baseline conditions. One of the things we are really concerned about is that applications have been granted in Scotland for regulatory exploratory work without full planning permission, without necessarily knowing what actually the condition is down below. And the other thing that's worth saying is that there's a big debate to be had about fossil fuels. Now, some people argue that it's less CO2 damaging than coal, but in the long run we are going to have to manage with the resources we've got and do much more on energy efficiency and the use of renewables. So we've got our triple lock against the proposals until we've got the health and environmental safeguards in place. So we're very critical about the suggestions that Scotland could be somewhere that has huge use of fracking, and certainly in the short term we've said not before anything in the rest of the UK, so we don't want to learn the lessons. There's been some really difficult issues in the US in terms of groundwater pollution and lack of application of regulations, and in terms of our local authorities, they do not have the expertise in our different local authority departments to be able to deal with something that's as complex So that's why we don't see this as a short-term development in Scotland. In terms of how we vote and having more fairer voting, when we were involved in setting up Scottish Parliament, we made it proportional. We used the German system, which we felt gave local representation, but also gave an end to first past the post. I think that's been broadly successful. In terms of the UK, we supported the alternative vote, and when we had the referendum, it wasn't passed. And I think actually it's because a lot of people didn't understand what it meant. So I think that's a key thing. You know, we had a 2-year debate on whether or not we wanted Scotland to have independence or to be separate from the rest of the UK. There wasn't that same running, I don't think, and I don't think people were as interested. So I think there was a big issue about education in terms of fairer voting, and Ed Miliband has been absolutely clear that he isn't planning for any coalitions anytime soon, and it's up to the voters to decide how many people get elected. We'd like a majority Labour government.
I believe that the SNP was invited to weigh in on the fracking, right? And the Greens also.
The SNP would continue to support the moratorium on fracking as it stands. That's a policy in the manifesto going forward for this election. What we have been able to do in the Scottish Parliament, where we don't have control, as Sarah said, is to use the planning system as best we can to have put exclusion zones in for how close fracking can happen to communities and things. And that was an initial indication that we were not going to be happy about fracking taking place in Scotland. With the promise of the new powers coming to Smith, obviously that took a while to come down. The position at the moment is to support the 120. On AV, the Scottish National Party has supported proportional representation for a long time, as long as I've been a member of it. I think we have seen the benefits of what kind of politics that can deliver, both at local government level with proportional representation there, and also in the Scottish Parliament. So I think it was a shame that the method that the Liberals managed to get presented to the population was the alternative vote system, which is the least democratically reasonable of the ways of doing proportional representation. So it's not something that's a priority for this election in the manifesto as such, but I certainly think that if we have a number of progressive parties and support proportional representation in big enough numbers, we can push that case forward for future Westminster elections.
Thanks. Pat?
Fracking. We are probably the only party that's completely opposed to fracking. And we would suggest that any of the money that's spent on developing fracking should be spent on renewables. That it doesn't really matter. Fracking is destructive. We wouldn't want it anywhere in the UK, never mind just in Scotland. We don't want to be polluting the water in any part of this place. And we would also be saying that not only should fracking not be done, we should be stopping our reliance on fossil fuels. We need to be thinking differently about energy altogether. We need to be making more energy efficient homes. We need to be concentrating our own energy and creativity around renewables. It's completely possible to do it differently, and we need to. The whole planet needs to. It's ridiculous to be having arguments about something which is an outdated idea of using fossil fuels, and fracking is just one of the kind of last gasp attempts of a dying industry, as far as I can see, to do something which is of no benefit to anybody in the long term.
Do you want to say anything about proportional representation?
Well, we would support proportional representation, and with our sister parties in Northern Ireland and England and Wales, we would also be working with anybody we could to make that more of a reality.
Great. Now, you were not invited specifically, but feel free to have a minute.
Okay, on fracking, yes, we are against fracking. In fact, there's a Scottish Socialist Party councillor, Jim Boland, in Western Bartonshire, and their council was one of the first Scottish councils that were at the head of the campaign to ban fracking in that area. That's definitely our stance on it. We would favour greater investment in renewables, so that would be our. Just take that in there before my other ones. In terms of the changing to PR. Sorry, who was it that asked that? I didn't get their name. Oh, right. We're a much smaller party. We do better under the PR system. First past the post, I think, it's quite a confusing system, and it doesn't always feel particularly democratic. I'll be honest and say I'm not 100% sure that we support PR in its current state, but I can find out and get back to you. I'll get your details at the end. For the UKIP coalition, no, no and no. Our co-spokesperson Colin Fox recently wrote a pamphlet on UKIP, Europe and immigration from a socialist perspective, and you can read in around 30 pages why we're absolutely under no circumstances going to any coalition with UKIP. We believe immigration enriches our country economically, socially and culturally. So in case that wasn't clear, no.
But how do you really feel? Okay, another round. Hands. Oh wait, first before we start with this, questioners, are you happy? So to speak. Okay, next round. Claire, are you okay to start?
Yeah, certainly.
And we're going to need timing on this. Okay.
Is that a minute pressure? Thanks. Denise's first question about leaving the EU, I think it would be disastrous for the UK and disastrous for Scotland in particular. If we were to leave the EU, I think we all benefit greatly from being part of that union. We benefit in all sorts of ways, and the ability for us to go and work in Europe, for European citizens to come and work and contribute to our country here. I think the links that are built up with Erasmus programmes and everything else, are greatly beneficial to all the countries that participate in that, and we need to encourage lots more students in Scotland to do that, so I do think it's really important. We'll be debating TTIP tomorrow in the Scottish Parliament. I'm sure a lot of the concerns that people have about it will be aired in the Parliament tomorrow. And from my point of view, the most important thing about TTIP is that we protect public services, especially the National Health Service for its involvement there. And I actually attended International Workers' Memorial Day today in Lanarkshire, and there's a lot of concern also about the different regulation regarding the use of chemicals that may come into play should TTIP be constructed in such a way that these aren't addressed and that we aren't able to protect our workers here. So that's a big concern. So I think everybody's aware of the dangers of TTIP, not to say that TTIP in itself in its entirety should be scrapped, but certainly I think the issues will be well aired tomorrow. In terms, I didn't think the fracking one was directed. You were expecting an answer on that, thanks. Carrie, in terms of social housing, simply we haven't been building enough social housing for a long time. The SNP commitment in the manifesto is for 100,000 socially rented houses across the UK. They haven't specifically said how many of that would be in Scotland, but obviously we're building houses in Scotland to address these issues, and I think what we would be able to do is get rid of things like the bedroom tax that have skewed the market, and go back to the House for Life policy that they had of building 2-bedroom houses in Scotland, and that being part of the policy. So there's some areas there that we certainly recognise how big that problem is, and we also are very concerned about the changes in welfare, the direct payment to one person per family, and how that might affect a family's ability to cope with their budget, especially, and the direct payments of housing benefits to families is a great concern as well, in terms of what that might do in putting more people into poverty. So that's a big concern for us. And the final question on the Middle East, it's one of the most troubling things in my lifetime is that the Middle East seems to have been at the forefront of international concerns for my entire life in one way or the other. The SNP does support recognition of the Palestinian state, and we would be taking that forward as in all levels of government where we can in our influence to try and adopt the UN position on Palestine. Hopefully that would improve the situation. In terms of direct sanctions, I don't know what the SNP official position is about sanctions. I think what we do know is that in terms of the anti-apartheid movement, how well that did work to change opinion, and I do think that collectively as people we've got a lot of influence in these areas as well, regardless of what the government's doing at the international level.
Okay. Yeah. So we also agree that we should stay in the European Union, but that we need to take a look at the way the European Union supports multinationals rather than being for people. So it needs a certain amount of reform, or a lot of reform. And that leads on to TTIP, because TTIP is for multinationals, and the Green Party is completely opposed to TTIP. We feel it's a driving standards down across the board in all sorts of areas that we don't know yet. And there are some horrendous implications. And I've heard people say it's not that bad. If it's not that bad, why is it not open? It's behind closed doors. I would recommend everybody tries to get the tickets. Are actually sold out for most of not available for tomorrow except for the second session. If you're interested to go to the TTIP discussion, because I think we've thought about it in terms of NHS and there's been a lot of publicity about that, but it also affects food standards, it affects animal welfare standards, it affects workers' rights, it affects a whole lot of things which multinationals are interested in driving down standards-wise, and we're interested in driving up. So I think it's diametrically opposed to most of our sensible policies. And yeah. Housing is a mess. I completely agree. Housing is a mess, and I think that we need to think more about social housing. We need to think about alternatives, to think about co-ops, and also to use the fact that we own most of the banking system to change the way banks operate. Because if we have local banks, we support credit unions in localities. Then different types of ownership of houses become possible a lot more easily. Because at the moment, to get a mortgage for something or to be creative about setting up a co-op is very difficult, with the banking system's not really geared up for that kind of thing. It's only recently they've been able to deal with shared ownership. So I think that we need to promote all different sorts of styles of housing, and also we need to think about something different from council tax. And land value tax, which is a Green Party policy, is a really innovative tax, and it's an idea that would also affect over time property prices. So there's one idea, which is you charge, the council charges people the value of the land. So clearly city centre land is more expensive than land in your house. So that directly affects the tax. And there's also a policy to make a set... Israel. Yeah, we've got other really good policies about that as well. Israel, I think we should stop the arms trade into Israel would be one thing we could definitely do. Sanctions are also a possibility and a good thing to do, and the Green Party supports a two-state solution.
Sorry to interrupt.
It's okay, I got carried away.
So Denise's question on the EU, we believe that we should stay in but reform it. So obviously at the moment it doesn't work for the 500 million people across Europe it's supposed to support. We would look for big changes, we would look to align with other socialist movements across Europe to bring in change to the EU, but we do think the best way to do that is reform from within as opposed to leaving. TTIP, I find terrifying that private companies can sue a government. There's a company in Egypt, they actually work over here as well, they're a waste collection company, and the Egyptian government brought in a living wage, and the company were able to sue the government for the money lost from paying their employees the living wage. That is not a system that's going to work for working class people or any people in any country. A TTIP is a race to the bottom for medicines, for workers, for food. It creeps into all areas of life, and as we said, it's behind closed doors, and that's one of the most scariest things. I think the best thing to do to that is for everyone to get as much knowledge on it as possible and just keep it in the limelight as much as possible, because it can't just keep being this secret thing that all of a sudden creeps into our lives and takes over in some of the most fundamental ways. The housing market is a mess. There's not enough houses. That's a simple answer: build more houses. In our manifesto, we would want to see 100,000 new social houses built. There's less people fighting for these homes. It just makes the situation better. Also, through that, we could create more jobs and around 5,000 apprenticeships per year through building and renovating these new houses. So it works on different levels. Also, on a grander scale, we would take construction and supply industry into democratic public ownership. Housing is a social need, should be met with social provisions. And foreign policy, yeah, we support a Palestinian state, for sure. I don't actually know our stance on the boycotts of Israel, but I'm pretty sure that it's coming up in the conference. So we will have more on that, I think, after me.
Sarah, thanks. And can I just comment on how refreshing it is when people just say, actually, I don't know. Just want you guys to know that.
Okay. First question about the EU. We are against leaving the EU. We think it's absolutely fundamental to the UK's prosperity, and we think it's also important in terms of when it was set up after the Second World War, it's been there to enable countries to work with each other, not to fall out with each other. So the expansion of the EU is something that Labour has supported over the years, and we think it's been positive. That does mean we have to negotiate more, and I think one of the biggest criticisms we have with the UK government, apart from the right-wing perspective that says we should leave, is that the UK government looks like it's not interested in being in Europe, and there are basic fundamental decisions being taken every day that affect us. It doesn't strengthen your negotiating position if you say you're off. So we're very much committed to the EU, but there are things you could do to make it reformed. The TTIP example is a good example of something that doesn't have transparency, that starts off as an idea about promoting trade, but actually there are worries that we will be debating tomorrow in the Scottish Parliament about its impact. There are health and safety impacts, potentially impacts on public services and competition. I have a meeting with the Rural Minister in a couple of weeks' time to raise the issue that rural workers have got in terms of their concerns about its impact on farming and agriculture. So it's one of these issues that it will be a massive document, and the challenge will be to look at the detail, but that detail is not available to us, and it should be. And I think for Scotland, the issue about the EU is, since devolution, we've had more access to the EU directly on things like ferries and things like fishing, but we need to have that regularised. And one of the things in the Smith Commission gives the Scottish Government more rights to be part of the lead in that role. At the moment, we've got the right to be part of the process, but Smith ups the requirement on the UK Government in terms of our representation, which is a good thing. In terms of, I should pick up the fracking question, absolutely local authority decisions. That's one of our big concerns, is that there's no way they have the expertise in this issue, and the part of the triple lock is a local referendum before any position could be passed. So that's actually, that would be something local authorities would have to consider. That's quite a radical proposal, and that's because we think it's such far-reaching implications for people who live in an area that could be affected by fracking. So we think that should be something that local people should have a proper voice in. The question that was asked about housing, probably agree with much of what's been said. In terms of our manifesto, fairer tax is one of the things we've particularly looked at, the mansion tax. There are many houses in the UK that are now valued at more than £2 million. Those house owners should make a bigger contribution to society. We would benefit from that in Scotland through the Barnett consequentials. Labour has come out to say that we believe in rent controls. Edinburgh is a classic example of, we have a shortage of private rents available. Half the people in private rents can't afford to pay their rents, and that's partly because the prices are going up and up. So we would have formal rent reviews. It was something we had in 1945. It is radical. The Tories have criticised it in really florid language, things such as it will be destroy the housing market in Britain. It won't, it'll get it back to a better balance. We urgently need to address that issue, and for us in Edinburgh, people in Aberdeen and Glasgow, that would be a big benefit for us. House building, we would benefit from Labour's Barnett consequentials of a massive house building programme, particularly for social rent. We supported the SNP's land and building transaction tax, so that when you sell a house, and when you buy a house, that you pay a bigger contribution than we did previously. It's replaced stamp duty. It's one of the benefits of devolution. And the £1 billion, which is currently paid in housing benefit, alongside rent controls and alongside new house building, we think that would help. Israel, we recently voted in the House of Commons to recognise a Palestinian state. I don't have off the top of my head our view on sanctions, but I think Ed Miliband is very much in favour of Europe and the world looking at what's happening in Gaza and the West Bank and saying it's not acceptable. And that's something I think he would take quite a strong line on, and he's been clear about the representation of the Palestinian people is something that is unfinished business, and we would play our part in international negotiations on that.
And Martin, feel free to jump in on the fracking thing, because I can tell it's killing you.
No, it was just that I want to answer the point about people not having expertise. Absolutely correct. It's a very specialist field. That's why the British government has hired a company called DNV, Den Norske Veritas, which is an independent Norwegian organisation, global in scope, for safety and inspectorate. It is a recognised problem that very few people in Britain has the expertise. That's why we need to hire the experts in the field to do that. They're totally independent of the British government. Okay, I'll move on. I'll start with housing first. Liberal Democrats have pledged to see 300,000 new houses being built. It's simply not enough. The experts are saying another 100,000 or 200,000 on top of that is needed. Looking at Edinburgh, for example, when the crash happened up in 2008, 2009, where I am, up in New Haven Harbour, the Port of Leith Authority just simply stopped building. That says to me that government needs to be more involved in developing affordable housing for everybody. And it does take government drive and willpower in order for this to happen. Make no mistake about that. Also, this upping the standards of our own houses, especially in countries like Scotland, where the insulation on many of the older properties is still in such a poor condition, and the Liberal Democrats wish to achieve at least C environmental standards, okay, that's a minute, for insulation by 2025. Next is the EU. Obviously, we're against leaving that. We only want to see a referendum if there is a huge change that needs to the permission of the British government. I noticed, British people rather, I noticed that the leadership of the Lib Dems have left it open as part of any coalition talks in the future, which is a shame because we should be wholeheartedly supporting the EU. TTIP, we've been criticised in this country by the European Commission for the poor quality of our debates on it. Come to me, I've got an excellent website which from the European Union which tells us about a lot of what's been happening at TTIP. The standards of information is simply nothing that we're getting in this country at the moment. As a party, we are for TTIP, but we have to be cautious on the ISDN. No, that's a computer term. ISDS mechanism, which is the right of corporations to appeal. That was mentioned in the context of Egypt. On the TTIP debate, the negotiations are being led by Germany and France at this time. The UK have pretty well isolated ourselves because of our in-out attitudes towards the European Union. So we've lost the lead on this and we're almost spectators. But the French, for sure, said France does not want to see the ISDS to be included in the negotiation mandate. They want to preserve the right of the state to make their own decisions, especially on spending and public services. Israel. I've got to be careful here because I really lost my temper on this one. I did 4 years rotational work out of Israel. The Liberal Democrat position is to favour a two-nation solution. As I said last week, that is not going to happen. That is never going to happen. Israel has taken far too much land. At the risk of repeating myself for people who heard it, when I heard that the airport was to be built, the Palestinian airport was to be built in Netanya, which is in Israeli territory, and the reason for that is that they said, oh well, we're going to keep control over who comes and goes, obviously. Then there is no two-state solution. Please take it from me. You know, this, for arms, yes, the area is flooded with weapons. It keeps being flooded with weapons, and that's only firing up the, okay, I know, firing up the conflicts there. The whole economy is based on war. We need to change that. They won't change it themselves.
And do we have a comment about the sanctions, boycott, or divestment question?
Yes. You know, I think there are Palestinian. Okay, quick. There are Palestinian businesses which will be hurt. It's almost impossible to separate out Israeli and Palestinian agricultural products. So, you know, I'm open to the idea, but I'm not convinced about this either way.
Thank you, everybody. I'm seeing those hands and I'm delighted, but just to check in with our questioners, are you happy that your questions got answered to the extent that they might be in this kind of a forum? Okay, yes. So, as always happens, suddenly, as the night starts to draw to a close, everybody wants to ask a question. So, there's 2 in the back, there's 1 right here, so that's 3, 4, and then 5, okay? Oh, and then 6. Okay, but that's going to probably do us, so please be very focused with your question, and if you want to target one in a nice way, one of the people on the panel, that would help us with our time issues. Let's start with you, Martin.
Okay, right, that's a big list.
And in 1 minute, we're going to be filming.
Welfare, the universal credit in its idea is designed to help take people, you know, ease people of benefits, avoid the cliff falls that I mentioned earlier about swapping from benefits to a workplace environment. But it is, obviously, I also mentioned the childcare earlier, and we want to see, by the end of the next Parliament, 20 hours a week free childcare for 2 to 4 year olds. And also more, you mentioned that you're a non-standard family, fair enough, but for people in partnerships, more equal rights when it comes to taking parental leave. At the moment, the onus is very much, tends to be very much on the female partner. Trident, okay, Trident, I can't imagine the use of the damn thing. I really can't when it comes to nuclear weapons. I'm totally against the ownership of nuclear weapons. My party wishes to see a retention. There seems to be some kind of argument that if you own them, you're less likely to suffer international blackmail over it. I mean, you know, did Russia ever really intend to invade us in the 1980s? I very much doubt it. So, sorry, you're asking the wrong person. Can we afford Trident? No. Should we maintain the 2% spending levels? Now, I think this is a function of NATO NATO membership. But we have to maintain that thing. Whether we should be looking at our role in NATO and NATO's role across the world, I suggest would be the biggest question on that, because it's been too much of an arms fair since the end of the Cold War.
No recourse to public benefit and fuel poverty, and you have 1 minute for those.
Okay, so fuel poverty, as I mentioned earlier, we should be helping insulate homes, and we should be starting with the poorest people first. The markets do fluctuate, and I would like to see that people who are living in substandard housing actually get a winter fuel allowance, as well as the elderly at this time. Because if you've got young children, coats on the bed, I had that when I was a kid, but there's no solution in the 21st century, you know. For freeing women's hostels, obviously, yeah, the vulnerable need to be protected. That's a liberal principle. It's finding the funding to do this, and it should be made a priority because.
Time's up, Martin.
Okay, thank you.
Now, but feel free to have a chat at the end.
Yeah.
And can I just say to each of you, you have a lot of questions and you have 2 minutes, so I think it's okay to just pick the top priorities for you. Yeah? Okay.
Oh yes.
You didn't get to it. Sarah?
Okay. I'm going to have to speak to people afterwards. There's so much here. In terms of the treatment of women, asylum seekers and people coming to this country, we're absolutely clear that we want to end the detention of asylum seekers who are pregnant and victims of sexual abuse or trafficking. We need a much more humane immigration system. There's a lot that's wrong with the current system, and there's also support for women once they are here. We would give Women's Aid more resources so that they could do the job that they're struggling to do at the moment. So that would be 2 ways in which we could hopefully help that situation. And in terms of benefits, the Scottish Parliament will have the capacity for top-up benefits once the Smith Commission powers come through, so it will be up to us to consider how we want to use the benefit system we have in Scotland. In relation to Trident, the UK Labour Party has worked very hard to try and negotiate away nuclear weapons. The party at national level is committed to looking at replacing Trident. I would say that the other things you need to think about are that we are not the 4th biggest nation in the world, but we have got the 4th biggest international development aid programme, and we would want to keep that. We're proud of that. And defence is not just about weaponry and conventional arms. We've also got to put a lot more into poverty reduction, human rights and democracy building across the world. So that is something that I think has got to be at the heart of our defence programme as well, and that is in our manifesto. In terms of the questions about fuel poverty, freeze on energy bills, absolutely central to take the pressure off people who are currently under pressure. New housing, much more energy efficient, and issues about upgrading existing accommodation, more investment on that. Women in politics, no woman in politics should have to suffer any feminism. Should have to suffer sexism.
I think she said anti-feminism.
Thank you for that, Chair. That's on record, which is good. And it doesn't matter whether you get social media or traditional media, sexism is not acceptable for women, whatever position we are in society, whether it's the person at the top of the country, an MSP, an MP, or a councillor. Nobody should be subjected to sexist or abusive comments or treatment or pictures or cartoons. I think it's a big issue for us as women to stand up for how people are treated, particularly women.
So for the first question, we, like I'm sure all parties, have a zero tolerance approach to violence against women. We would introduce full funding to women's aids and other agencies that provide refuge and helplines and drop-in centres for anyone who's experienced domestic abuse. So we would fully fund women's aids to combat that. For the lady talking about being a single parent and working, our kind of spearhead policy at the moment is a £10 an hour living wage for everyone over the age of 16, men and women, full-time or part-time. It's what the government openly agrees is needed to stop people relying on benefits so much. We are subsidising these employers to pay poor poverty slave wages. It is to stop £10 an hour living wage for everyone, and it's now, not in 2020, that we want it. That's our main one. We also support 12 months statutory maternity pay and 1 month paternity pay, and also the right for partners to interchange that if they want to, so the female can give some of her maternity leave to her partner. So, but the £10 an hour living wage one is the main one, to just fully support that, so that everyone and anyone feels that they can work and get the right earnings for that work. For fuel poverty, one of our main things would be we would nationalise gas and oil industry. It's a social problem, it's not something the private sector can deal with, it shouldn't be run for profit, it's a need, it's a human right. You hear these horror stories of people, of the elderly using their bus passes to go to Aberdeen for the day because there's heating on the bus. It's disgusting. So we would also propose a windfall tax on the profits of the energy companies, and that would be used to pay for additional fuel poverty programmes as well as the ones that are already in place. Briefly on Trident, can we afford it? No.
Right, so a few of them together: welfare and single parents, and ending detention for asylum seekers, and thinking of some other way to ease people into society. And also to think that though they're tied up together with the Green Party policy of a citizen's income, and that I think that answers a lot of the difficulties, because a citizen's income would be something for everybody, a universal benefit. It's been costed and it can be paid for by using the tax system, and it would mean that everybody would have a basic ability to live. Because I think fuel poverty, food poverty is about poverty, and our attempt would be to end poverty in that way. And what you also do by doing that is reduce stigma. You have something that's easy to administer, and that the other thing that happens is that people have a freedom to work and not work. And I'm saying work and not work, I mean be paid and not paid, because actually the work that's done out of love and care is also valuable to society. So we would address that in that way. And I think that that would also, if you thought differently about citizenship and about people who come to this country and are really welcomed, it should apply to those people too, immediately. And fuel poverty is also increased by the fact that some homes are poorly insulated, that people have prepaid meters that are really expensive, and that they're paying in advance for fuel that's very expensive. That has to stop. And we need to be thinking differently about energy. We've talked about that earlier. And demonisation of women, that shouldn't happen. And I'm really scared by what the Conservatives are saying about Scotland. It makes me scared. It's what happened. It seems extreme to say this, but it's the start of what happened in the Balkans, where people incite nationalism in the negative sense. And that's not what we were wanting when we were talking about independence. So I think I'm really cautious about that. Thank you so much. And there's lots of other things I want to say, but can't.
Take a deep take a breath and try and get through it all. I'm often asked by young children that visit the Parliament, what's the best thing the Scottish Parliament has done? And without a doubt for me, it was done when the SNP were in a minority government, and that was to extend the right of children of asylum seekers to get higher and further education. Up until that point, at the age of 16, that was the end of the social responsibility for those young people, many of whom had spent their whole lives in schools in Scotland. And I think it sends out where we are about asylum seekers and what part they are in our community. I think the ending of Reid's through use of withdrawn police support was another indication. And I think what we're seeing now is I'm absolutely appalled. We're seeing reports about Dungill at the moment and not knowing about whether there are hunger strikes going on there, but people have been denied access. But one thing that makes me really, really angry is these detention centres are privatised down the south. There's reports of people being paid an allowance of a couple of pounds to do cooking, cleaning, decoration of these places, you know, maintenance jobs. And I mean, we have a minimum wage in this country, and I think it's absolutely shocking that these companies are getting away with this usury and abuse of people in the asylum system. So it's something I feel so powerful, so strongly about, and I think we should do everything to you know, welcome asylum seekers and make them part of our communities in every way that we can. In terms of the benefits paid directly to women, I think if we're talking about equality, you know, equality goes to all levels. We know the welfare reforms have dramatically hit single parent families, most of whom are women, more dramatically, and we have to take away these gender assignments and gender issues within the welfare system and start dealing with people as individuals and people as people and families as families, and getting away from this benefits going to one person and not the other person in the family. And that's one of the big concerns about the new system, is that it's only one person in a family who will be in receipt of the money, and that gives very great concerns for women. Oh, the rest speak to me later. Can I just touch on the First Minister? She just said.
I actually think we probably know how you feel about it. So, it's 8:30. We could probably go another 2 hours, although I haven't had my supper, I don't know about you. So, I'm not going to. I just want to say, first of all, to congratulate. So geez, these women, they just want to talk about women's issues, don't they? We never really talked about defense. No, wait, we did. We didn't really talk about economics. No, wait, we did. So can I just point out that you folks are living, breathing a counter-argument to why women are not interested in politics, and to congratulate you on the intelligence and insight that I think the questions revealed for the candidates and for the parties on the table. I would also, so my first congratulations is to you. My second congratulations is, well done you guys for a really tough, I think, set of questions. And I would also like to thank everybody for the amiable atmosphere in the room, and to point out that that's kind of what you get when you got women-only spaces. So thank you again, and thank you Susa and all the rest of the Edinburgh Women for Independence people for organizing this amazing event.